Hello everybody, Pinstripe here. Welcome back to another scrim. Tonight it is me up against Mr. Zarin once more here on Railroad, a map that is basically Albert's hometown, but you can see from our lineups they are incredibly different. Mr. Zarin going with the Med Para Sapper Scout Gunner, very mixed. Meanwhile I'm bringing the Scout, the 2 Paras and the 2 Sappers. The Paras going in turns 2 and 4, while the Sappers take up turns 3 and 5. And as you can tell from the title of this video, we are going to be talking tonight about operating without a medic, which automatically many players will see as a disadvantage. But to me, I enjoy the challenge in this particular video because when it comes to having a disadvantage, as soon as your opponent makes a mistake like that and gives you a little window of opportunity back into the game, that is where you must take that advantage to the fullest and basically take up every single supply available on the map, because there are multiple crates hiding in the houses, there are health crates to collect, and bearing in mind the minefield is there that the paratrooper can see. He holds that ability, but Zarin was still just kind of blinded by the prospect of collecting crates. He neglected to check the mini-map and indeed see in front of him, and I want to keep him within this vicinity in order to keep him near the minefield, because the TNTs and my sappers are going to be very much overworked when it comes to TNTs. But yeah, it's very much a case of I'm going to deal with everybody else, and I'll split my forces and let my sappers deal with the dudes near the minefield, and my paratroopers can deal with the medic. Because when you're bringing a lineup that doesn't have a med, you can kind of tell with my scout going first, he is kind of the most important, because poison here is going to be very valuable. But ironically, as I say that, I do not end up using a single poison in this entire round. Instead, as I mentioned, I am looking to gain the first kill here within my first 2 to 3 turns, and using the TNT, it can be very easy, I guess, to go for the full 50, but I just need to nudge him that little bit forward. So I'm backing myself up. I'm not placing the TNT directly at his feet. We're moving it back slightly so that the knockback is then less, which will then give us the impetus to push him enough into the minefield to gain the kill. Now, I would agree that yes, it is situational, but the first piece of advice I can give when it comes to you facing up against an opponent that has the stronger lineup, i.e. they are bringing a medic and you are not, is to do what I'm doing right here in splitting my forces and basically stretching your opponents, all of their other pigs, you stretch them as thin as they can be, and you put the pressure on the opponent's medic to remove themselves from whoever they are tranquilizing and body blocking, to come and do some healing, and that really does pay off in the late game, as we'll get an example later on. But yeah, the more that you can basically say, you know what, I'm not going to focus on your medic right now, I've got other priorities, I've got my mind focused elsewhere, that, like, mentally can be a huge boost for yourself, because your opponent expects you to go for and target primarily their most important pigs, right? When that is the expectation and you do the opposite, and you have a clear directive from the get-go, and you have that confidence as well, it can be a huge shift. And bearing in mind that I've just dealt 80 onto the med, I have removed the body block through the paratroopers' jetpacks, which is kind of the normal approach. If you are bringing the double or even just a single paratrooper, he needs to have that directive of get to the med, break that body block, and then you can safely inflict damage onto the medic without taking any self-damage onto the dude that was tranquilized. In my case, it was my scout. Little did Mr. Zarin know at this point that in standing where he is currently, he is still playing to my strengths of my sappers, who is going to be taking his turn in just a moment, and you can kind of tell the direction that is going to go with those turns. However, in taking my sapper's turn right now, once again, the obvious focus for some players would be to just laser in on the medic, but I'm instead going to take advantage of the poor positioning to deal damage onto the enemy scout. And you could maybe argue that pro players, the priority should just be on the medic, but he's not really in the best position for me to deal big damage. If I were to go for the medic right now, I would be looking at a shrapnel, because TNT, yeah, okay, I can push him in a certain direction, but if I want damage and just outright damage, the shrapnel would be the easier pick. But instead, I go for the scout, given that I don't want any poisons around, and again, I am still looking to bait the medic into moving away from that trank and getting the healing in, as I mentioned earlier, because distance, as I shout about it in every single goddamn video, distance is so important in Hogs, because again, the pressure of the med being drawn away from his target to come and heal. On a map like this, it's quite easy because it's so flat, it's so direct. But if we were playing on over the top, or somewhere that just requires more twists and turns and movements and time-consuming maneuvers, that's where the pressure really sinks in. And again, I'm quite happy to lose a turn, because I feel as slowly as this match ticks on that my strategy is kind of working, and the pressure, as I mentioned, will be getting to Mr. Zarin later on in this video. So again, he is now trying to prioritize pushing my dudes nearer to the minefield, but the TNT from here doesn't quite have the ability to do that just yet, but he is looking to use the same kind of strategies that I was initially in my first few TNTs. But I guess if you take into account the turns as well, he is looking to, I guess in his next turn, nudge me into that area. But I am still very aware that the gunner is in the perfect spot, not for to be directly pushed into the minefield, but now to be grouped up nearer to his scout, and bearing in mind that I do hold a TNT as this paratrooper. Again, the grouping up isn't perfect, but they are near enough close to each other, and bearing in mind that the minefield does contain an AP mine or two. Those are the more dangerous mines, of course, that deal more damage and inflict additional shells after their initial explosion. And as you can see from the fireworks, it is it is quite beautiful. So extra damage dealt onto the gunner. I kill the enemy scout as well, so no threat of poison incoming, which, bearing in mind the turn that was taken by Zarin's scout was a miss, trying to go for that double. That could have been very costly for me, but luckily just a slight mistake on his part in terms of the angle used. And now he has a low health pig to deal with as well. So slowly things are stacking up in my favor. I do of course have the advantage in pig numbers. It is a 5v3 situation now, and I am actually going to rely for once on the shrapnel to bring in a cheeky 50. So we've touched on that idea of stretching your opponent's forces. We've touched on the idea of distance and combining those two to just constantly put the pressure on your opponent and to keep it there in order for him to change his focus of just equip, trank, and shoot, to have to maneuver around to pick his target to heal and then get back again. And this is the exact example of where that can go wrong. So he, on roughly 16.5 seconds, gets the gets the healing in, gets a head jump, but in doing so, it removes even more time, and with barely 5 seconds left, you can tell that he's not going to make it, and so he blindly goes for a no-scope, which doesn't pay off, and leaves a big enough gap for me to inflict the final piece of damage necessary onto the medic, because this is where I deem it worthy for me to go for that final kill on the med. I am definite in my decision that I need to end the medic here, right now, and that is why, even with a mine crate collected, which would have been perhaps an easier solution, with 10 seconds remaining, I still go for my final jetpack and then combine it with the air burst that I have just collected in order to take down the med. Positioning here, though, is really not great, because even I have forgotten that there is a minefield behind me, but thankfully that doesn't come back to bite me. But again, in the Pro League, that would be an absolute no-no, because my paratrooper would very much be... there basically should be a double kill in this turn, in that the head jumps are coming in onto my sapper, but then the next obvious move would be to go over to that para and then just push him with a TNT into that giant minefield that hasn't even been touched, so he would instantly be killed. And yeah, I guess just food for thought for positioning next time. Speaking of positioning, I am caught in perhaps the worst spot, but interestingly, the planting of the TNT was a tad bit rushed there from Zarin. The head jumps took a little bit too long, and thankfully for my sapper, he doesn't end up in said minefield. So just on the cusp of being touched by the mine, but thankfully no detonation. I mean, look at how close that is. That is really unlucky. I think Zarin had maybe a little bit more time than he thought in order to get the placement down, but not quite. And here I'm kind of self-conscious of how close my paratrooper is to this gunner, so instead I switch my attention back over to the enemy sapper in order to do exactly what he was attempting to do to me, in that I'm going to nudge him into the minefield. And it's on this occasion, where we see the detonation of the AP mines, which allows me to get the tiniest amount of splash damage onto both this sapper and onto the gunner as well. So there's the detonation, 6 damage onto the gunner, but I mean, any extra damage is something that I will definitely take quite happily in this situation. Again, looking at the minimap, seeing where my paratrooper is, there's a giant red marker behind him, so you'd kind of expect some kind of damage to be dealt there, but I think Zarin is still very much conscious of the fact that my scout is still alive. He still poses the threat of poison, but once more, I won't be using them at all in this video. So we're at the point now where the medic is toast. I have dealt with the main issue, and I still have my first pig alive, but even though he is finally going to take his first turn of this entire round, the poison won't be coming out, and I'll be relying on the crate that I will be collecting from this building, in this case a rocket launcher. So it's very much like first turn, first kill here for the scout, because the 50 is all I need in order to say bye-bye to the enemy sapper, which will just leave the gunner, and then the rest of this round kind of gets a little bit derpy, and I really should have just walked up to the gunner to end this, bearing in mind that he's on 49 HP. It is a 1v4, so you can kind of expect it to be game over, but Zarin continues to fight on valiantly, of course, while I mess around and kind of mess things up repeatedly. I think for the majority of players that are going into rounds where they are obviously bringing the weaker lineup, it can be very easy to kind of bring that depression with you, in that you know that you're automatically on the back foot because your opponent holds that advantage. But if you come into it with some kind of confidence, with some kind of strategy, and if there's a medic, if there's a grenadier, if you know that your opponent prioritizes body blocks in those first few turns, then you can bring this kind of approach of trying to draw them away from certain areas and, you know, kind of have them bring the battle to you, have them bring those mistakes, because that's really all you can do. You kind of need to understand how much you can do with the squad that you're bringing. In this case, you know, I prioritize the doubling of the paras and the sappers because those two are very strong in maneuverability, and when we consider railroad, you know, you want to be pushing pigs around as much as possible. The other solution, of course, is that I had my scout going first, because this is another map where the doubling and even the tripling of poisons in a single turn is huge, and the sooner that you're able to poison the most important pig, the better. In this instance, you know, I didn't. There was no poison to be seen, as my scout does indeed fall, but he kind of gave my opponent the main pig to focus on, I guess, and with the removal of the ability to poison, it didn't faze me. I didn't, you know, get flustered. Instead, I just played to the strengths of my paras and sappers and did what I could and let my opponent make those mistakes to then open those doors for me to come in and capitalize on it, because that's, again, all you can really do in those kinds of situations. I think if a grenadier was in the mix here, then things would have been even more difficult, and I would have had to rely even more on the environmental hazards around me. So I guess final thoughts really: use distance as much as you can, utilize knockback where possible, and water and minefields as much as you can, and prioritize those important pigs when you deem it necessary. If you laser in on the most important pig, you end up kind of getting tunnel vision and you forget about all of the other classes that still need the damage dealt onto them. You need to split your forces and deal that damage across all of them so that the healing that is available from the enemy medic is stretched thin, bearing in mind it is just the single healing hands per turn, so 20 HP is all that can be dealt, and if you have to give up the skip turns for a long time, then just deal with it, adapt, and try and move forward. Easier said than done, I know, plenty to learn from, but I'll catch you guys later for the next one.
Right, you putrid porker. You should be proud of your hogs. I've given you, 5 additional promotion points to decorate them with. Are you listening to a word I say? Repeat after me. Minefields are very bad things to wander into. Now, press your button and we will be the richest nation in the world. Just imagine, limitless swill supplies until the end of all time. Oh, God, don't mess it up.